it's not enough just for you to say the words, although that's very important. You got to believe God. So you find out what you're believing God by finding out what you're expecting. So it was, in your notes there, the Jewish commentary, the Mishnah, records that the people believed the evil report of the spies and mourned all night in fear. Remember last week I told you about God told Moses, send out 12 spies. These were all national leaders to spy out this land that God has given to us. And they did for 40 days, and they came back, and 10 of them said, we can't take this which is ours, what God says is ours. And 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, said, we can, but the people believed the majority report. I love that song, Ron Canoli, whose report will you believe? Whose report are you believing? I'll tell you this, you're probably going to believe the report that you hear the most. If you don't ever feed on the Word of God and you just feed on what the world says, it's going to be very hard to believe God because your senses will be overwhelmed. And their senses were overwhelmed when they saw the giants in the land, and they saw the ites in the land, the Hittites and the Jebusites, all those ites. They became afraid of them. And so they decided not to do what God said to do because they said, we can't do what God says we can do. But Caleb and Joshua said, we can do it. But in doing so, the Bible really says they despised their inheritance. Just like Esau despised his inheritance when he sold it to Jacob. Are you despising your inheritance? You say, well, I don't despise my inheritance. But God says you've despised my promise to you by not believing me and going in and taking the land. You see, during the 10 plagues that God did in Egypt, the people had to do very little. Matter of fact, they didn't really do anything during the 10 plagues until Moses said, now apply the blood of the lamb to your doorposts. Really what they did during those 10 plagues, they just saw what God was doing. God was just demonstrating to them what He promised that He would do. And that was fair because they didn't know what God could do. They'd never seen His power, really. They lived in Goshen, but they were taken care of, but they were slaves, really, weren't they? So God, through those 10 plagues, not only defeated the gods of Egypt, but He also demonstrated to His people and to all of Egypt and all the world that I am God and there is no other. So after these 10 miraculous plagues, and then they did have enough faith to apply the blood of the lamb, the Passover lamb, which for us is Jesus. They had enough faith to apply that to their doorposts, and God brought them out with silver and gold, loaded down with silver and gold, and there was not one sickly, feeble person among their tribe when God brought them out. And then He brought them out, and He parted the Red Sea, and they walked across the Red Sea on dry ground. The Egyptian army followed them, and God swallowed up the Egyptian army in the Red Sea and killed them, and He said, you're not going to be bothered by them ever again. So these people had really seen 11 miraculous, well, more than that, but at least 11 miraculous dealings of God with them and for them. And it should have been more than enough for them to fully expect and fully believe the power of God. You and I are in the same condition. You and I cannot plead ignorance. We cannot say to God, I've never seen your power. I've never heard about your power. We can read the Bible, but we can read countless millions of testimonies of other people that God has done things for miraculously. And really, for yourself, you know that God has done miraculous things for you too. So we're just like the children, the Hebrew children, as they were to go into the promised land. We have experienced God's presence. We've experienced God's miracles. We know He's the one true and only God. We know that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father except through Him. We've seen the miracles of God, and now we're expected to act on it. They didn't.